I wanted to help other people and Shakespeare, which is adjacent to what I do as a writer, which is I share with John Steinbeck. He said his whole mission as a writer is to help people understand one another, and I'm completely share in that. If you have a kind of maxim or belief that you feel offers purpose and something worthwhile and benevolent, then you need to like really hold on to that and really use that to build your experiences.
I'm excited today. I'm talking with Kristof Morrow, and we had such a lovely introduction call. And I have to say that, Kristof, your message to me when we first connected on Podmatch was something to the effect of just sort of sensing that we might connect from what I had put out there, and then looking at not just your profile, but sort of your story and who you are and how you've become who you are and gotten to where you've gotten in your life just really resonated with me. So when we first spoke, I felt like whatever sense you had when you first messaged me about being a guest was just reiterated when we actually had the opportunity to meet. So I'm happy to finally be sharing the mic with you and recording an episode together.
Yeah, easily my favorite pre-interview discussion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that so much. Well, you have such a unique story and there's so much to it. So I'm sure that, we'll get into as much of it as we can in this conversation. But I guess before we just head straight off the deep end, I would love to ask you, is there anywhere that you want to begin with your journey as somebody who is an author, Army veteran, and you also have Tourette's. So that is something that has played a significant role in your life. So I don't want to assume where you want to start. I want to give you the opportunity to pick.
Well, I think a philosophy that I try to sustain is that you need not to lose your faith in others and to always submit or allege that people are worth your trust. Hemingway said the best way to learn how to trust someone is to trust them. Which is, he was otherwise a very cynical guy.
It's also a harsh truth, isn't it? It's like, it's sort of the whole, when people show you who they are, believe them.
That's absolutely true. Or otherwise, Oscar Wilde said, after a certain age, every person has the face they deserve. Cheerful smiles. And, I think I've had a lot of reason to lose trust in people, based on those who were meant to love me the most, or just otherwise, and failed in that sense. And so I realized, but that came still member to a greater thing that I needed to, in self-interest, I needed to do something worthwhile while I was around. And so Shakespeare, I told myself when I was young that I didn't want to be boring in conversation, and that I would live an exciting life, but at least try to adventure.
Yeah, I love that. You have such a unique experience. I think what's beautiful and incredible about the human experience is that all of our experiences are unique, obviously, but yours is definitely one that there is an emphasis, I think, whether or not you would highlight this yourself, as sort of the topic of resilience comes to mind when I think of you. And I think this is for a number of reasons. But what I recall and think about, as I was preparing for our episode, something that you shared with me in our intro call was growing up in a very abusive environment. And for anybody who knows a little bit, I think at this point, about psychology and sort of childhood development, the early years are the most formative. And that's where a lot of our self-beliefs come from. And so I'm curious if you'd be open to sharing a little bit about, what your childhood was like, with it, I guess, sort of within mind, like how you went from what your childhood was to the path that you're on now. And I know that's there's a lot of in between there. So not asking for a straight shot, but more just sort of, where do you feel like you began in life, and we can kind of navigate that into where you are now?
Well, I think it's one of those things where you're sustaining. It's cognitive dissonance where you're sustaining two thoughts that are competing, that are at odds, and believing both of them
Mhm.
simultaneously, right? So, Shakespeare, I was meant to feel worthless and or less than or inadequate. When as a kid, and I really don't remember very much, and that's a symptom of trauma. Obviously,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people know that Shakespeare. But I was beaten really vicious. In fact, when I have to tell people when I talk about this, I to demonstrate that I'd say that my dad would hurt himself hurting me. You know, like so it was really very violent. The reign of terror I lived. I really don't remember a day like that where that wasn't happening to me. For it could be really his caprice was relentless. It was and boundless. Yeah, at any moment, like it could be for any really, it could be for any reason. Like I remember once, one particularly bad time was because I walked ahead of my brothers and sisters home
Wow.
uh, after school, and I walked too far ahead of them.
So you had brothers and sisters. Did you feel like you were more the target of the abuse, or was that collective?
They readily concede I was probably 90% of it,
Wow.
and I had, three siblings, right? Shakespeare. I was the oldest boy, though. Coincidentally, I was the oldest boy, and I received it the worst. I was the first to graduate high school, though, out of my siblings. So I was the third. I was the third born.
Oh, wow.
And that's really meant to highlight how awful it was there. Not to discount the intellect of my sisters, my two older sisters. It's really about what happened. Uh, it was very traumatic uh, uh, situation, trauma inducing. Yeah, so for me, I I was experiencing that and told I was, just less than and not worth love or affection. I felt like through the violence and uh, what they would say to me, and but also seeing movies and TV shows and not really people in person. It was some people in person, but the notion of like knights and of being a good, like saving the world and being a hero and that sort of thing. I was really outrageous in in what I hoped to even achieve then because I think it was I think I had to uh, uh, hold myself to that because I was so I like to tell people also that I only let my ego get this big because I needed to climb out of a well.
I appreciate your humor because I feel like you have
Mm.
such a lightness to you with having gone through something that's so devastating. What I admire in the way that you communicate is like you have a lot of clarity about how you coped with the situations that you experienced. Is that something that like you started to develop at a young age, or is that something that you've had to kind of go back and inspect and be able to like navigate through as an adult?
Oh my god, I was painfully self-aware. That was a little. That was. I remember I was like 6 years old, and I told myself I would never treat my own children the way that my dad and
Mhm.
mother treated me. That's really how I think my worth as a writer arrived. Was born of that because I watched people so closely, and this is also a symptom of trauma and abuse. Like, if you have a parent who you have to emotionally sort of check in and see how they're feeling, you learn to study faces and micro expressions,
Yeah.
and so I meet very few people that can but I can read people's faces very clear. To me, that it's much more apparent like what they're feeling internally, even if they don't want to present it openly. I can um, generally, yeah, not always, but generally, I'm much more attuned to that.
I'm gonna actually go back to something that I thought earlier when you were saying, like, kind of seeing things in your life, like, the idea of, like, a knight, somebody who can kind of save and help people. Did you find yourself, at that young age or even in later in life, like, kind of using those, opportunities to experience life through sort of, escapism with like fantasy and things like that that like helped you navigate that cognitive dissonance? Like, were you like, did you read a lot of fantasy? Did you watch a lot of fantasy related things that like kind of helped you through that?
I think I fantasized a lot. I imagined a lot of being rescued,
Mm,
saved from those circumstances. I don't remember necessarily watching a lot or reading a lot. In fact, I think I counted. I've read only a little over 100 books in my life. Shakespeare, which doesn't flatter me. I understand, but
I mean, to
uh,
be honest, I don't know that if I really had to be honest with myself that I've read fully 100 because I get very invested quickly and then I drop off. I mean, a little bit of that's ADHD, but some of it's just a
you
function
know,
of not having found things I'm interested in. So I listen to a lot of
you
books.
know, no, that's great. No, reading, to me they're interchangeable.
Yeah,
Truly,
consuming.
consume. Yeah, because Shakespeare. And so for me, uh, a lot of my ability to tell a story, especially one that was born of truth, uh, was me trying to get people to help me
Yeah.
because I would tell adults and they would sort of just listen and then nothing would happen. And then it was a story, it was like I had to keep refining the way I explained it. And so words became precious to me in a way that was is very solemn, I think. Um, but I've tried to uh, generate some kind of beauty from that.
Well, I definitely think you have. You've obviously, the book that you've written has had a profound impact on a lot of people. So your words are definitely making a desired impact. And I think that's so incredible. You had messaged me somewhat recently after we'd first spoken about your book being referenced as reading for a college course, I believe, correct?
Yeah, Shakespeare, right? For classes studying Victorian literature
Yeah,
and Dickens.
that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it's a dream come true. I know that sounds modest, which I guess I concede it is, but Shakespeare. That's a bar that's hard to reach in the first place because it's yeah they're very picky with that sort of thing, especially literature professor.
In terms of your growth, both as a person and as a writer, like, was there sort of a turning point for you where you found yourself finding freedom through your writing?
And I think uh, it's hard to. It's like falling in love without any senses. I think if you didn't have your senses available, uh, but you still knew there was something there that just made you feel at home. Uh, and then you slowly develop your understanding of why you love it so much. Shakespeare for me is it's really about the music of words. Uh, I have an extraordinary amount of affection for them. I don't. It's in fact like if I have the subtitles on, I just end up watching because I just like the way they look, and I like that to every person they have this very uh, unique relationship with them. However, there's also a macro definition that is fixed. It's more rigid. It's more established. Like the word quarantine, for example, used to be have less meaning
Right.
to everyone,
Now it's a
and
little
now it's
triggering.
yeah, it's a little triggering. Yeah, and so the evolution of the of words within a society and stuff, and trying to understand people's like our lexicon, our relationship with words on the edges of our vocabulary. Um, really fascinated me.
Mm.
And there's so many qualities towards it that I could talk about that, but ultimately, I wanted to tell stories, and so it was when I was in the Navy. I had my friend's mother, Deborah. She gave me she bought me a laptop after she won a disability case against the city that she had started like years before, and she won a bunch of money, and she said she would buy me a laptop, and that's when I started writing on it on a laptop. And then uh, Shakespeare. After I got out of the Navy, I started working in writing in a community college. I was writing while I was in community college, which yeah, and I developed from there really.
I mean, that's such a generous thing for somebody to do.
And
It's not even about the money as much as it is the opportunity that it afforded you to like find a place for your words.
it really was.
you were very much self-taught, correct?
Oh yeah, I taught myself. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
What was that experience like for you? Did you find it to be like invigorating to you because you have such a passion for it?
I really hadn't been presented with any evidence that I could learn it from someone else very readily, because I realized that through studying people's, like, the words they would use, their word choice. Everyone has their own lexicon. They have their own established way of speaking and communicating. And I knew that if I wanted to do something worth Shakespeare worthwhile as a writer, as an artist, it would have to be developed on my own.
Mm.
But I would be studying the words and uh, presentation of other writers that I really admired, and whose truth could be uh, like Dickens, and Mark Twain and Shakespeare, which is ironic. And I say Shakespeare
Well,
as
I
a
was
tick.
to be honest with you, I had this moment where I was like, I want to ask about this.
Yeah,
If that was
yeah.
like a decisive like way to manage your tick, because I know some people
No,
pick like pick words that they can kind of at least this is something that I've witnessed when I've watched some shows and they're like they try to find like a word that like they can use instead of profanity.
Shakespeare. Shakespeare. I have OCD, and almost invariably mine are born of that. And since uh, since I discovered just how beloved Shakespeare was, I've always wanted to have that for myself, achieve that legacy,
Hmm.
something similar, Shakespeare. And so I've always given him considerable thought, just his existence and what his name generally represents with people. And so doing that, it it just that's where it was. It created itself. It's just something I think about a lot. So my brain just
References
says it.
it.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's not by design.
Yeah.
Shakespeare. I wish I could do that. That would be amazing.
Uh,
It sound, but I see that that could be true though. I see why that could be certainly true that they do that.
yeah. I mean, I won't act as if I have any substantial knowledge on the matter, but you could see that when I forget which show it was that we were watching, but the one guy when it was like some sort of like meeting people, dating, whatever. Um, his
Mm.
tics
Yeah,
would
yeah.
become far more significant when he was meeting somebody because he was very nervous. And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
like some of the things that would come out were like comical, but also profane. And so you're like trying to kind of like, you can see the person's trying not to react because like they understand.
Mhm.
But I I think that like there was something else that as you watched the episodes go on, he started saying other things. And so I appreciate you answering that because I feel like for anybody listening, if you're not familiar with Tourette's, if you do not experience this, then like it's very helpful to have real honest conversations where somebody is willing to explain it to you what your lived experience is with it because otherwise we have no way of knowing. So I know it's a little bit of a diversion from the initial
Well,
topic, but when I think about the fact that you're a writer and words are so important to you and the way that you think and construct your conversations with people, do you feel like it has been challenging throughout your life to communicate effectively in speaking versus writing because of dealing with Tourette's?
Shakespeare. I didn't become symptomatic of Tourette's, as far as I know, until I was 19 and I was in the Navy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Which is really is even outside the DSM-5's diagnostic criteria for Tourette's, which is supposed to be it's supposed to present before Shakespeare. It's supposed to present before 18, which is a really funny and rigid.
I was gonna say how arbitrary.
Yeah, it's a stiff. Yeah, yeah, Shakespeare. Because I matured emotionally. I matured much slower than my peers, and that's also a consequence of trauma too. Because if your whole brain is committed and dedicated and devoted, loyal to surviving, your nervous system, uh, and your nervous system is on fire constantly, hypervigilance, right?
Hmm.
uh, then it you don't really have the resources the cognitive resources to dedicate to like the piece that you need that's required to understand, like to study other people and to be a part of the social experiment in the same helpful capacity that other people have. So for me, communicating, yeah, it has been really hard. It was really hard for me to develop friendships and relationships with people, especially my own age, um, until I was out, like in college, really.
Yeah.
Um, Shakespeare, and like after the Navy, even
How old were you when you were in the Navy?
I was nine. I started. I joined when I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah, Miss Shakespeare. Um, yeah, but I yeah, I really struggled for a long time, and also because I had no confidence in the notion of communicating because when you try to talk to people like your parents, and that is a complete failure over and over and over again, you start to, um, I mean, self doubt is just a symptom,
Yeah.
as a consequence, rather.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that context because, something that I think is interesting to consider too is like when it comes to, so I experienced like a great deal of trauma in my 20s, early 30s. And when you said like your nervous system is on fire, like there's that hypervigilance, like I can't relate on the childhood level. I'm very lucky that I was raised in a loving household where that was expressed, but I also know that like things that happened in my childhood affected like the relationships that I chose. And therefore, that sort of, it was like a little ember that was like waiting to spark if I got into the wrong relationship. And so I really understand that visceral feeling of, you're sort of shrinking yourself to the circumstance. And then once you release
Mhm.
yourself from that circumstance, you have a lot more opportunity to access the things that you're feeling and put words to it. And something that you had said around like
Again.
speaking to vocabulary and having the words for things in general is I think we all struggle sometimes to get the right words to say things in the way that we want to say them to begin with. But in particular, I think now is kind of unique because we speak about, things that we've learned about our lives. We look back and we think about, childhood, whatever. And you kind of go, well, I didn't have the words for it back then. I didn't know what to call it or how to express it or whatever. And so I feel like there's this collective sort of awareness that we're all gaining that the things that happened, we might not have even been able to process that they were happening because we didn't even understand that it was a thing that we needed to think about or consider in the way that it affected our lives.
Yeah, Shakespeare. I think it's paranoia that truly has a font of it's a font of truth to it. Like so, like when you know that that at least this potential exists, and that how greatly it affects other people that have gone through that, then I think you're sort of prepped to uh, bring it in and to form it to your person, like to your, I don't know, to your nervous system. I mean,
What would you say, has been some of the more important lessons that you've learned in allowing you to access the parts of yourself that are giving you the opportunity to experience more, self-love and deeper connections with other people because as you said, relationships matured later in your life just as a result of like where you were and your experience and where you came from.
yeah. Hmm. Um, it's hard to say, uh, but ultimately, like yeah, I knew what my strengths were, and I tried to capitalize on that.
Mhm.
And I mean, to be frank, like I'm a white guy, so not a lot of barriers of entry for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So Shakespeare. Yeah, and so I really tried to take advantage, and also I think if you construct a purpose uh, behind what you hope to do, like for Shakespeare, I wanted to help other people, and Shakespeare, which is adjacent to what I do as a writer, which is I share with John Steinbeck. He said his whole mission as a writer is to help people understand one another, and I'm completely like share in that. And so if you have a kind of maxim or belief that you feel offers purpose and uh, the notion of something worthwhile and benevolent, if you in if you can even achieve that, then you need to like really hold on to that and really use that to build your experiences. Like, so Shakespeare, if I wanted to help other people, I became a corpsman in the Navy, so as a medic for people that don't know. And then when I got out, I became an EMT, and then I was a 911 dispatcher, and then I got into journalism after that. And all of these are some sort of service, and try to serve a purpose beyond myself, and had a mission beyond myself. Um, and that will, I think that offers like a draft of what you hope to succeed in, like in terms of like what you hope to achieve in that field.
What was it like for you transitioning from a career in the military to journalism or and medical, obviously high intensity situations to journalism?
I to be honest, the I would say that civilian life can be very, very, very um, intense, and working in the medical field. In fact, maybe sometimes even more so, uh, because uh, they are different kinds of uh, destruction to like just your overall view of like what is good in this world, and like what is, because it, in one way, like when you're in the military and people, you lose shipmates, like which we call it in the Navy. um, that is a different kind of trauma than it is when you're in the civilian world, and when you lose kids,
Yeah.
and moms and dads and everybody, all these different people, the spectrum of us, of our existences, then it's they're different, uh, and I would say, uh, yeah, just as potent in that sense of, uh, yeah, of damage that it does psychologically.
What type of journalism did you start out with? Like, were you doing like coverage in the field or was it something separate?
Yeah, I'm gonna run the face because it's so funny. Okay, because it's so outside of like what my interests are.
Okay.
Like, okay, look, I love playing sports, but I cannot bring myself to watch them.
Yeah. No, I'm actually very similar in that way. Like when I stopped playing sports, I stopped kind of caring.
Yeah, right. So I'm Shakespeare. I mean, I will watch it, but it's always a hollow. It's pretty hollow in terms of my enthusiasm for it.
Mhm.
And I'm really fed by other people's enthusiasm, really more so
Yeah,
than
no,
my own.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, so like it really other because like if the stakes are high, there's got to be a context to it. Like, I love watching sports movies where because you can, yeah, you build a relationship with the team, knowing what's going on. Uh, yeah, so I started in sports, right? I was the I was a sports journalist, which made no sense whatsoever. But again, I was covering like a high school football team, and um, look, let me preface this. In Texas, football is king,
Yep.
and it is so stressed and so heavily funded, and you know what? It's a lot uh, it's a lot like government, in the sense that the districts can be gerrymandered in a way where, so like you get all of the 6 foot
Yep.
4, 240 pound kids are going to one school because the coach, like they figured out how to get to where, oh, we're gonna have this other street because we heard this family moved in.
Oh my God.
It's so like I've heard of coaches like having students live with them, or living in like it like taking care of their living arrangements so that they could live and be on the same team.
Mm.
And yeah, that's real. That's so real.
Priorities.
And this football is, I mean, I think the highest paid employee of like the University of Texas is a football coach, I think.
That
And that's like that almost, I think that's true for everywhere.
yeah.
Like more so than the school's president,
Oh,
the
yeah.
university president. Yeah, anything like
That
that.
seems
Yeah, the
right.
football coaches. So I was covering a team, and it was a very poor district. They didn't have a lot of money. Very great. They didn't have facilities very, very much at all, and they didn't have the pool of players like to build their roster. And so I they they lost every game that I every Friday I had to go I had every Friday. And I felt for the coach, man, because you can't do there's nothing you could do
You're
when
like
you
really
just because
hoping
the
for an
kids.
underdog story there.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the thing is the kids like start to feel defeated too. Like they start to lose interest, and you can't blame them for that because it's so uh out there.
Like
What
draining.
was the word I'm looking for? No, it's like it's not level.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's just inequitable. Yeah,
There's so much that they are going without, and not everything is a movie. And so whenever you just strip a whole community of resources, you're not going to get like the situation where they can rise up and take over and win and everything, and proving the human spirit is the most dominable thing,
yeah.
the dominating part of what brings you success.
What a microcosm of the state of the world.
Yeah, so I had to right, right. The football team taught me this,
Yeah.
so I had to. Yeah, so I had to every week, I have to go to the games, and I'd go to watch the games, and I'd see what was going on. I had to photograph and do that, and then I'd have to come back to the office and the newspaper, and it was like 9, almost 10 o'clock at night, and the paper goes to print at midnight. So I had to write the story. I had to get the other journalist stories for other games and sports events, and then I had to assemble the paper, that section of the paper, and have it ready before midnight. And so like I would have to call the coach after the game's done every week and be like, "So, coach,
How do you
what?
feel?
How do you feel about the game?" And it felt awful. It felt awful because there's nothing you can do, and there was nothing he could do. And so yeah, it was terrible. Um,
Did you end up moving
and
away
then
from sports in your
no,
journalism career then?
yeah, I was, yeah, I was willing to beg. I was willing to
Yeah.
beg. Because not for a multitude of reasons. Um, and mostly because I wanted to do something that I felt was worthwhile for me. Um, and I asked if I could work in news, and they had their writer leaving. The main news writer was leaving the paper. Um, and then so my publisher slash the editor, the, the editor in chief, she said, "Yeah, you can do it."
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so I became like the main news writer, and I did agriculture too, which is relevant to my experience. I grew up on Shakespeare. I grew up partly on a farm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in a farming town.
You're from
And
Texas
so
originally, correct?
yeah,
Okay.
born and raised. Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, I covered I was there during the Hurricane Harvey where they
Mm.
hit Texas, and this I remember the smallest cotton farm there lost 300 grand.
I feel like there's no particular direction to go because there's so many questions that I have. So like when you think about where you are now in life
Mm.
and your career, take it however much you want to include your career in this, because I think as a writer, that's something that you're sort of always doing to some effect, or at least thinking like a writer, probably to some degree.
Yeah.
What do you feel has been like the biggest shift in your mindset from when you were doing journalism to where you are now, being more public about your life experience? Because it's not solely about your written works. You have a lot of content that you create just sort of about your own lived experience as well,
Mhm.
whether you're putting that to paper in terms of a memoir, or it's something that is just really core to you and what feels right for you to express in the written word. Like that's a much more vulnerable place to be.
Yeah, I think Shakespeare. Whenever I started to develop more serious symptoms of Tourette's, I should let me rephrase that because I don't like to grade my own suffering or my own symptoms. The severity of my symptoms, I think, it's an unhelpful way um, to describe and a way to feel about what you're going through because I don't want to discount other people's
Mhm.
Tourette's and how symptomatic they are, because you know, especially for this reason. If I've known people who have like Tourette's that they thought was a minor thing because they would like grunt or make a noise or something, and then they come out like years later and they learn that they have like an extraordinary amount of damage to their throat, like because of those ticks,
Mm.
and like other parts of their bodies for that reason. So I wouldn't want someone to think, oh, I don't hit myself in the face, I don't gouge my own eyes out, I don't hit my hands on things like to the point where like my hand is like looks like that now compared to this, which is like looks relatively flat and normal
Yeah.
because I've hit things so much that it deformed my hand a little bit. Uh, and so when I started to experience symptoms inconsistent with being able to focus, I think I stopped writing for 5 years, uh, from 27 to 32. Even though I won an award for feature writing and photography at the paper from some press associations, I uh, I still had lost a great deal of confidence, and I withered by doubt,
Mm.
through doubt. And so after when I became 32, it was just after my 32nd birthday. I had been working with the British Columbian office, Work BC, to find me work, and given the parameters uh, and my condition, they told me they couldn't find me a job. There was nothing I could do, and her name was Erin. She was really reluctant to tell me that. I think for reasons that should be plain. And I, yeah, and I said, and she said, okay, well, you like writing, you said, so maybe you should just do that. And I said, okay. And then we hung up. And about 10 minutes later, I wrote this book. I started writing this book. Well, yeah, that was because I had at that point, there was no other way for me to run. There was no, I couldn't generate no diversion, no excuse because there was nothing else I could do. And then I needed, I know if I wanted to contribute and to do something that would help other people uh, in a way I felt was meaningful and true to who I was, and something that I could do was of quality. I was gonna die. I felt like I was gonna die because I felt like I was pointless and a burden. It's not true at all. Even if I hadn't written the book, it still wouldn't be true. But uh, I felt that way. It was an extreme that afforded me um, the sort of hopeless beginning, because I had no other, yeah, I had nowhere to turn. So
It's interesting to look at it that way. I'm sure in the moment felt like a hopeless beginning, but, looking at it from my seat, it looks like a hopeful beginning.
mhm.
I've become a great believer in divine timing and things sort of working themselves out the way that they're going to. And while I imagine that must have been like a real challenging moment to hear sort of that, eh, sort of like the system giving up on you, like, sorry, there's nothing for you, even though you're totally capable.
The Canadian
Yeah,
government
come on, guys, get it together.
of all the places.
That's very defeating no matter who you are or where you come from. But what a gift for that person to have even just like lit the spark of the thought that like maybe you should turn your attention to this thing that you really care about,
Mhm.
because that's just such a great example of sort of nudging that first domino to fall. And then look
Mm.
at how impactful it's been for you and for other people. I think that that's one of the great examples of not really seeing it in the moment, how it's going to play out for you. Like, definitely have had some of those in my life, but
Mm.
then when you're on the other side of it, you're like, God, I really actually probably couldn't have gone any other way, or I wouldn't be in this position. Is that a little bit how you feel with that?
Yeah, Shakespeare. Yeah, there's uh, additionally, like I had my ex, she told me basically every day that for 7 years that we were together that I needed to write. She told me that every day. And so, yeah, so for her, she was really a large part of it, but there was a sort of a very thin wall of resistance that um, the Work BC counselor Aaron sort of revealed, and it was like she punctured the wall, and then the flood of certainty that someone else had afforded me, who put in me, yeah, destroyed it. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it was a really yeah. So I started it.
So, can you share a bit for listeners what your book is about? And I know you have another in the works currently, right?
I just finished actually the second. So this is volumes 1 and 2. I just finished volume 3.
You finished that fast, I feel like, because it was like since we last spoke.
Shakespeare. I had a yeah. I actually, which is really, yes, I did. I did it really fast. Yeah. So I started it. I finished this one last year in February, technically, but I was doing this pretty significant um, rewrites for certain parts and rephrasing things up until about July,
Mm,
and all the while from March until uh, I guess March until March of this year, I was writing volume 3
mm,
at the same time, and volume 3 is like 2/3 of this length, so it's like 400 and something, 450 pages or something.
it just
Um,
flows out of you then.
it Yeah, it's Shakespeare. I don't. The thing is that it's really funny because people think like, what does it take to be able to do that? You If you want to write a book, you have to like realize that you have to inspire yourself, and so and the way you do that is by learning as much as you can about the world, because then you can include events, you can include notions that you've been exposed to, and you can offer your own view and form of that, uh, and realizing different events. Um, like for example, this is not in the. I don't think this is in the book actually, but there was this team of people that came to kill the king of this place. They show up and they're in the castle. They've gotten all the way to the king's chambers. They're just outside the king's chambers. Somebody runs into the thing to go tell the king something, and they discover he's already dead. And then what happened? He had a heart attack. And so this people, they shut the castle down. They're like, close the castle down. And they're like, we didn't even get to do it. And we got caught anyway because he freaking died too early. And it's just it's interesting, right? So there's stuff that's like intrinsically interesting, things that interest you, like concepts and historical events. They could teach you so much.
Mm,
Explore history and science uh, really, really thoroughly as you can, because and discover the way that the relationship that you'll have with words, because they could, like we talked about quarantine earlier, there's so many. Once you learn, like when I look at a word, I see 1,000 different ways of how it's connected with us, like all the different ways it's been used that I can think of, and then what is the planet where's its planet of existence, like where does it what is the planet of thought that every other variation that it's been used for, it orbits,
mm,
that it so yeah, so you begin to like understand, like it's the the most essential truth about that word, and that's what you have to do. You have to look, and so once you do that, every time I see a word, that's what I see. Like Hemingway said that um, every every time I see a word, it's like I'm seeing it for the first time, and I know what he means by that. I love it. It's transformative. It can be very transformative to your understanding of the world and how people talk.
yeah, well, I love that you made that point too, just sort of in the way that we look at words or we respond to words. And using quarantine as an example, I think is a really good one because probably for a long time, up until 2020, that word would have had minimal emotional effect on me, if any.
Exactly.
It would have
Yeah.
just been an acknowledgement that that is a word. I understand what it means if something's quarantined. And I almost feel like if anything, I probably would have used it in a joke, like sort of like been quarantined, like as
Mhm.
something flippant. And now it's
Mhm.
like I'm extremely uncomfortable with it. It's like because it brings back a rush of, collective trauma for the world. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
I feel like it's such a good example because everybody probably has some feeling on it now that we never had before. And
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
great way to expose like our relationship to words in
Mhm.
a way that a lot of us don't think about, particularly probably if you're not somebody who writes or speaks frequently in like more of a public format too.
Mhm.
And it doesn't even have to be like, millions of followers or anything like that. I think
Yeah.
even just thinking to choose your words wisely based on the environment that you're in, based on what you're comfortable sharing, what other people are comfortable receiving, but not necessarily allowing that to censor you, but being more conscious of like, how can I express what I want to express that will have the greatest impact? And to have the greatest impact, I think we have to be cognizant of how other people receive those things, because if their perspective on a word or words is different, you're now kind of up against like their preconceived notion of what you mean versus what you're actually trying to say.
Mhm. Mhm. That's why it's so important to, like, be true to yourself when you're writing it because you are going to have your own view, and it's going to be, constructed by you completely and your experiences, which really truly are unique, and so you remain faithful to that, uh, you will find a very lovely and empowering way to, like, communicate.
Mm.
It's essential.
Okay, so I asked the question, then we diverted because I had other things that happened. So can you share a bit about your book and like did
Oh, yeah.
I and because it's because well, so
I'm
it's
so bad.
no,
I
it's
have a marketing person now, and they're like, say you don't talk about it." I'm like, "I didn't forget."
but here's the thing, like, I always say to people, like, I've become a lot more firm in this stance as I've grown with my podcast, and it's not in terms of, like, growth in terms of proliferation, like, my feeling of, like, what feels right to have conversations about on this show is, like, this is the show where you come to, like, say the things that don't get airtime everywhere else. If there's something to promote, like, I wanna help promote that. I think it's important too, but I wasn't going
Right.
to ever lead this conversation with tell me about your book, because what I want you to do is tell me about you. And what I'm
Yeah.
curious about in terms of you sharing about your book is what it represents for you, because it's fiction, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
I
it's
mean, yeah, I mean, yeah.
so it's not like it's a memoir, but do you do you feel in writing this that you, as you said, like you're pulling in your perspectives, things you've read, things
Mhm.
you've learned, but are there elements of the book that are related to your lived experience that are sort of metaphors in the book, or something that is more you know in an environment in the book you wouldn't necessarily be like, obviously this happened in Christoph's life, but like writing it was sort of a manifestation of that?
I actually there's so much, actually. There's for example, I have a whole, paragraph where I talk about, there's a little kid who, uh, he is, he's much like I was when I was a kid, and his name is Vodstock. And it says, "If one has never earned witness to a child discovering at last they belong, I beg you seek it out. For upon your closing breath, an angel's descent, such alms bearing your mark, rewards a deathless peace that," something about unruling the troubles of the mount. I can't remember now. As your soul becomes unruled by the troubles of the mount,
Mm,
which is your body. Like when you die, you'll be at great peace. Vostok slept with the it's yeah, he was much happier uh, with dreams of flying, his merry capture of permanence because he was finally accepted.
mm,
And so a lot of it, yeah, is informed by my experiences for sure. But I also everyone else's experiences that I felt like I could impart uh, in a way that's relevant and true to the spirit of that event for them. Uh, and so like Shakespeare, but I also the book is it's a work of epic fantasy, but it's literature. W- there, which is there are not a lot of epic fantasies that have that could be called literature. Truly, unfortunately, it's a slim, a lean field of writers doing that.
so you just
Very
really
lean.
niche down.
Yeah, well, it's just because it's hard Shakespeare. It's hard to do, I think, because I have over 180 characters with dialogue in this book. It's
I can't process that,
yeah,
Christophe. I can't.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of it was an extraordinary amount of work. But uh, oh god, I love it so much because the scope of it, I felt like I wanted to explore the macro and the micro in a way that you could understand the relationship.
Hmm.
So the book is about it opens. If you've ever seen Game of Thrones,
I have not. I'm sorry,
or
but
you
I'm
know
sure
about
listeners have.
so you know of it. The people who know of it, if you know of it, you know that there's a bunch of different people in different parts of the world,
Yep.
and then you see how they come together near the end. Well, my book is structured very similarly. The
Mm.
first three chapters are different people, different parts of the world, different people in different circumstances, and then you see how they're related. And so it opens up in a place that is known colloquially as paradise. It's a kind of paradise, and it's true to the nature of one. It's very peaceful, and people live for thousands of years. And when you die, you come back. You can bury yourself with a seed of a plant or whatever, and you come back as that immediately. Like you're born again into that form. And you could still talk and stuff. And
Mm.
anyway, but it's an allegory for generational wealth inequality, and the people that and so the people who have the wealth now, the older generations, they live in that kind of financial paradise. And as you read the book, you discover just how exposed and relevant the outside world is to them, and like how what can and like what chaos induced out there, how it can affect them, even if they seem to be shielded from it completely. Because you're not able to go there unless you because you'll just die. You'll just die trying to get through this sort of it's a mist. It's kind of like a force field in a sense. You can't get through it without dying if you're not welcome.
Oh wow.
Uh, and so yeah, and so these people feel they're so insulated, and it has realized the concept of a utopia, but it's not at all. And you start to discover that in the other chapters, which are dealing with empire, slavery, pirates. There's the spectrum of our suffering. I tried to explore. Um, I tried to. There's a whole bunch of really amazing older women. I like. Here's the thing. I like to describe it this way. Young men, older women understand the value that young men provide in society. They do. They just do. But young men do not understand the value that older women offer. And so I tried to demonstrate healthy relationships between those two demographics. And not I don't everybody wants to talk about the suffering, and just it's sort of like if you've seen Game of Thrones, it's like watch this torture and watch this thing happen to this woman, and
Yeah.
it's like I'm not about that. I wanted to show something more wholesome. If you were to find Lord of the Rings and make it a little bit much more gritty and take out the elves and there's almost no magic, and even in the magic that is in there, you might argue it's something born of science rather. um but anyway, yeah, I wanted to focus on demonstrating good quality, what we're capable of doing, and how we can cooperate. Um, yeah, and so much of it is about showing our worth. Even anyone can achieve great things regardless of their size or their place, which is something that Lord of the Rings really stressed. But it's really gender exclusive. There's not a lot of women that really do very much, uh, extraordinary things in terms of fighting in wars and that sort of thing. It's just not there.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's no racism or sexism in directly referred to. It's alluded to in events, of course, but it's not. There's no one say you're a woman, you can't do this, or you're a man, you can't do that.
Imagine. Imagine. You did imagine. You imagined it and you put it in a book, and I love that.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
I think that that's such a statement on where we are in the world. I have a couple of thoughts on what you said. First of all, I love the comment about, like, the relationship between younger men and older women, and, like, that dynamic in reverse as well. And what speaks to me so much about that is, like, the acknowledgement that there is wisdom to be gained from each other. And the only thing that limits that is really our perspective on it. And
Mhm.
what I think is really profound about what you're doing, the timing is impeccable, Christophe. It's like really impeccable. It's
I think
impeccable.
about that all the time. I think about that all the time.
This unfolded the way that it was supposed to, is how I feel. Like, I think the timing of it, as I said, like, I've become a believer in divine timing. For the
Mhm.
circumstance that unfolded for you with, like, when your writing career, like, in terms of this writing, really kicked off, but, like, the world wouldn't have been ready for this if you had done it sooner.
I think about that a lot.
The world is really freaking ready now, man. They are ready and they are like wanting this. And what is incredible is like that type of representation of the story is, you were saying it's not like, magical or whatever in this regard. It's like it's about humanity. It's like the message of like what it really means to be human. And there can be
Mhm.
elements of fantasy in that, but
Mhm.
the desired, output of that and the impact that it can have is like, can you see yourself in this? Can you see somebody that you know in this? And can you reflect on that, regardless of if this is fictional or not? Like, what an opportunity to see the potential of humanity through the words that you're sharing.
Yeah, I totally agree on the timing thing. It makes me think of it. There's that book, I cannot remember the name, but it basically described how, like, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and a number of others, they were born at such a time. They were, like, 14 years old when they were exposed to computers and coding for the first time, which was, like, prime time to really be learning that sort of thing, and so they were able to develop businesses before, like, really anyone knew what to do with it. Shakespeare. So, for me, who is a hugely, I adore literature, for the reason that, I feel like it has the notion of, developing prose that is meaningful, and really, explains the nature of things, like, in a way that is poetic and enduring, was really, really important, to me uh to obviously, because that's my main focus is literature. I put it I wrote an epic fantasy because I wanted it to be accessible and exciting and adventurous. So, at Shakespeare, it's an adventure, truly in the greatest sense. Uh, and because there's so many books out there that are literature, and they're just I love them. I love them. I love them because I love them because I understand, like, its value, like, with the words, there's a lot of nuance to, like, you have to know and to be able to, like, discover, like, the power of it, but, for a lot of people, they want stories. Stories have much more, structure, and and they're easier to impart. Um, it and they have the lesson, they still contain the lessons, but without, the finer points, which, can be explored on their own. So I wanted to write stuff that was intrinsically interesting. Uh, and I, uh, when I talk to people who've read my book, they say that they experienced every emotion, everything that they could possibly feel, and there's every kind of person in it. So, like, you will see yourself in somebody.
Yeah.
There's 180 people with. If
Like, I don't even understand. Like, I can't, I'm telling you, my brain can't grasp it. My wife writes, and um, she has told me about this novel that she had written previously. And she's like, maybe one day I'll come back to it. And just the way she describes it, and I can guarantee you it's not 180 characters, but I feel like sharing this conversation with her, honestly, if it doesn't inspire her to write more, I feel like at the very least, she's going to want to know how you made it. So you add 180 characters dialogue in this
I,
book. Like,
I hit,
what?
yeah, yeah, I had to count. Yeah, I counted them all with some of my friends that I've made through my book. I talk to every day now, uh, and that's the best part about having done it, is that I have real friends now that, uh, I know that people talk about, your friends should love you regardless of what you can do and that sort of thing, but I love that I began our relationship by showing what I can do and what I would do to show love, and affection for others. and I I put thousands of hours into it, uh, and I would cry myself to sleep at night wondering if anyone was going to read my book. Uh, and now it's on every continent except Antarctica, and I've sold in more than 50 something countries, including places there are gay relationships in my book, like plenty of them. There's yeah, uh, so it's illegal in some of the countries that people are reading it in.
And probably Florida.
Probably Florida. Oh my god. Oh,
The fact that you said that, like, about making friends and having that opportunity to show up fully. It's like, yes, it's, about what you've done because of what you've put out there, but what that is it's a tangible representation of who you are. And so if you have the ability to show up fully, and that can be done
mhm.
in many ways. For me, it's clearly talking. I'm just like, here I am. Who needs a book? I'm just going to
Great
talk to
at
you
it.
forever. But I think being able to put that down and share that with people in the written word, and have them, come around and share like the impact that it had on them. Yeah, what a beautiful way to, like, what a beautiful inception of a friendship, to be able
Beautiful.
to have that opportunity to relate in that way. And
Mhm.
it shows me that, like, similar to what has happened for me with this podcast, is like, you just don't know who's going to come into your life when you show up fully and you put yourself out there. And it has moments of being terrifying. And similar to you, it's like, well, I mean, who's going to listen to this? Like, does it matter? Like, am I just like talking into the void? And,
Talking into the void.
but the right people will find you. And I feel like what you just described is a true testament to that. And on, like, the personal side of that, for me, like, this conversation and meeting you and hearing your perspective and learning about your experience, like, that's there's something very reciprocal about it as well. Like, whether you're the person putting the content out there, putting yourself out there fully, like, if somebody is there and able to receive it and show up in a way that feels supportive of that, then, like, that's where, like, those really strong connections not only form but also sustain.
Yeah, I would not retire that effort I will continue because I would love to have as many friends as I can make, and, uh, some people I mean, I've had a few people tell me they put them in therapy, or that that changed their life in some way, like, one of my very dearest friends, she became so confident in what she's doing and what she's trying to achieve and stuff. It's like rocked her whole world. She's trying to navigate with her family's like, "What's going on with you?"
That's
And
incredible.
her yeah, and Shakespeare. I yeah, and people that have are traditionally accepted with really great jobs, like rocket scientists, have written me to say that my book is their favorite book now, after The Martian. Yeah, which is
Uh, You know,
relevant to their
I think put
job.
it in the win column.
Yeah, yeah, it's Shakespeare. I think Shakespeare. Yeah, and I'm actually I haven't. I'm so excited for Volume 3 because it's a much more intense character study, and I wanted to explore like people that because all the many characters I have, um, really finally you begin to understand them on a level that's much more intimate, um, and it's it's a lot. I don't know. It's there's a kind of a line that sort of like underlies the whole book, which is there's a woman named Captain Valara, and in the first book she says uh, she's talking to these people that have been enslaving children, and she says she's they're going to be executed. She says, "Your death today without incident is a mercy so wholesome the gods weep at my virtue." But then in the next book, she's intense, and she's in her 60s, and she's awesome. Um, but she says, and she's telling the kids that have come into her military that they like what is expected of people who hope to achieve liberty and freedom for others. Is, when liberty wars, she commands we forsake all our coming dawns, and each its lamb of hope, so others might enjoy our cherished reparations.
Wow.
says, it's about duty and what it's for.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I feel like that's a really great way to round out this conversation. What a powerful statement. And I feel like what a I'm so glad we ended speaking about your book because I feel, as I said, like the timing is impeccable. The world is a complicated place, and we by no means make
Yeah.
it easier for ourselves. Um, we're trying, some of us, but I think that something that is really important for listeners to consider, as you're kind of coming away from this episode is obviously, if Christophe's book sounds compelling to you, definitely check it out. It's called The Second Son, the volumes 1 and 2. Beyond your book, this has just been such an insightful conversation. I felt that way when we first spoke. I feel even more so now. And you said a few things during this conversation that are like really deeply resonating with me in terms of like really showing up for yourself and giving space to that creativity, but in a way that sort of don't put the pressure on yourself, like give yourself the space to experience it and feel it and show up and like look at just how much growth comes from that and how much potential you offer to the world by showing up for yourself. So thank you for doing what you do, Christophe, and for being here with me. Gang, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode. I just appreciate your support, and it means so much to me that you tune in week after week. The best thing that you can do to help spread the word about the podcast is if this episode resonated with you, go ahead and share it with somebody else, wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it from there. I also really appreciate it if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, because that really helps give people a better understanding of what the show's about and what you appreciate about the conversations that we're having.